All right, so now we're going to jump into a therapeutic alliance. Now, for behavior analysts in the room, this is not a term that I can say, at least in my graduate work, we used often or talked about. I think for some others of you in the room who are from other helping professions, hopefully that's not the case, and maybe this is a little more familiar to you, which is wonderful. But for behavior analysts, the knowledge of scientific principles of behavior, knowledge of evidence-based interventions, and the skill set to implement those are really a main focus of all of our graduate programs. And so what we do know, however, is in addition to those principles, the interventions, the skills to implement them, there is this other need, which is our ability to effectively work with other people. Now, for behavior analysts, roughly 73% of them work with individuals with autism, which means that we are very frequently interacting with parents of those children. And so there have also been many studies that have demonstrated that the success of interventions doesn't only lie in the effective implementation of those interventions by the clinician, but also in the carryover of those interventions by stakeholders. And so implementation of interventions within the family context, of course, really requires that parental involvement. And therefore, that working relationship that you have is, of course, really critical. In other helping professions, this relationship is often referred to as a therapeutic alliance. In behavior analysis, we have talked about it in terms of compassionate care. So that's a term that we are now using in the field. But in many ways, they are synonymous. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is. So having a strong therapeutic alliance is one way that you are able to improve your experiences in a collaborative environment. And so it's really important for us to be able to understand what a therapeutic alliance is and how you go about creating one. So there are three components that make up a therapeutic alliance. The first and most obvious is building rapport with another person. The next is agreement on treatment goals. And then after that is the agreement on the ways in which you are going to reach those goals. So what interventions, what procedures are you going to use to actually reach those agreed upon goals? Now, rapport building, of course, is no different than it is with our clients, which requires this ongoing attention. And it's especially true if interactions are based on potentially differing opinions, and there may be some potential for conflict. Now, the next component that I mentioned of a therapeutic alliance is deciding on treatment goals. This requires a recognition for all stakeholders that their needs are also being met. For example, questions about what is in the best interest of the child, what would improve the family's quality of life, what is going to get them to the highest level of independence in their home, what would make it easier for a teacher to manage their classroom and effectively serve their students. So once those goals for treatment are agreed upon, at that point in time, you're agreeing on the procedures and the approaches that you're going to use to reach them. Truly, this type of approach to collaboration, meaning one that is based on relationship building and identifying these shared goals, is imperative to successful clinical practice, regardless of how many individuals make up a child's treatment team. Unfortunately, at least for behavior analysts, there is a particularly limited scope of resources and curriculum available to teach some of these skills, to teach how to create and build effective therapeutic alliances. But I do imagine, I'm so curious because this is really fun for me for having people in the room who are not only behavior analysts. For those of you who have discipline or training in disciplines other than behavior analysis, was building a therapeutic alliance part of your training? Wonderful. Okay. I do want to ask this though. You sometimes are trained on things and then you get into the real world and you're like, oh man, I could have used a little bit more. Did you feel like you were ready at the start of your career to manage some of those challenging conversations with families? Um, I see yeses and nos. That's good and bad. But I think that there's something to be said for, reading articles, having classroom discussion, maybe doing some role plays, and then actually getting into it. And for one, I'm not even sure, no matter how much I would have done, would I have been really prepared for some of those first contentious situations. And I'll tell a story in a bit, a little bit more about that. But I do appreciate you guys sharing your experiences and what it was like for you as you entered your field. All right, so in the field of behavior analysis, Dr. Patricia Wright is one of our most influential leaders in the area of humble and reflective practices. Sometimes behavior analysts aren't so humble and reflective, and so this is important to have her teach us how to do better. But she tells us here that if we are going to expand our influence, then we have to be critically self-reflective and then be able to modify our behavior accordingly. So some of the slides that I'm going to go through, particularly for the behavior analysts in the room, may point out some of our skill deficits or areas in which we can improve. So I would encourage you not to take it as a jab, but just an opportunity to self-reflect and consider the ways that we all, myself, of course, included, can continue to do better. We know that the importance and the benefits of positive therapeutic relationships have been extensively studied in other fields: medicine, psychology, social work, counseling, and the strategies that are needed to enhance a therapeutic relationship, as many of you stated, are part of those respective training programs, which is wonderful. So I would say that behavior analysis should be no different. But surprisingly, there is a lack of literature in this area, but there have been some calls for improvement. Now, the first of these calls for improvement was in 1996, when Fox and colleagues suggested that the often negative view of behavior analysts could be attributable, at least in some part, to the behavioral repertoires of the clinicians themselves. Not surprising. Fox later went on to argue in 1998, 2 years later, that those clinicians that had this tendency to demonstrate a more humanistic and interpersonal approach were more likely to evoke strong behavior change, which is amazing, and we know then can lead to improved clinical outcomes. Now, what they also argued was that this was then in clear contrast to clinicians who were very rule governed and simply followed procedures without paying careful attention to the working relationship. Now, more recently, like I mentioned, for behavior analysts, we're talking about this approach in terms of providing compassionate care. In that particular article, they spoke about it in terms of behavioral artistry, which I love. I really like that terminology. And behavioral artistry was the term that they used to describe a skill set which they believed would enhance therapeutic relationship. Now, what we know, at least for BCBAs, is that Fox and others first brought this concern to us, to our attention, and brought the term behavioral artistry to us over 25 years ago. And while that term has changed over time, therapeutic alliance, compassionate care, the need to improve seems to not have changed. All right, again, we know that Fox and colleagues called us to do better starting back in 1996. And since that time, there have been some other continued calls for improvement. Several of those studies have been published within the last 3, 4, 5 years. So the first one I want to tell you about is Callahan and colleagues in 2019 conducted 2 different studies that looked at the behavioral artistry and its relevance to ABA practitioners. So what they did was, through the use of a 15-factor measure, they in that particular measure overlapped in definition of behavioral artistry from prior articles. And they found that students of ABA had self-defined or self-described lower levels of behavioral artistry than those in other helping professions. So they looked at all of these undergraduate and graduate students of ABA, social work, human services, education, and the behavior analysts or students of behavior analysis just were self-aware enough to say, I don't think I'm that great at this. And they're not. So what the second part of the study is that parents were asked to review and observe videotaped ABA sessions. And what parents reported was that those sessions that were completed by someone with self-reported lower levels of behavioral artistry were viewed as parents at less positively than those that were provided by individuals who demonstrated or stated that they had higher levels of behavioral artistry. All right, this next article I want to walk us through, Taylor et al. In 2019 had completed a survey study of 95 parents of children with autism, and they asked those parents to respond to statements about their perception of variables that would impact their relationship with their BCBA. Now, they were asked to provide feedback on how well their BCBA displayed skills in the areas of empathy and compassion, listening and collaboration. And then they also were asked about variables that would impact the relationship or would contribute to problems with rapport. More specifically, they were asked to respond to statements about how well their BCBA compromises when they don't agree with one another. They were asked if their BCBA regularly modifies the treatment plan and skill target to reflect the parents' concerns. They also asked if their BCBA seems to have his or her own agenda about their child's program. And so what they found was the themes from those statements were all related to how well BCBAs are able to communicate, how well BCBAs are able to compromise and collaborate effectively. Now, we know from the results of this study that families are indicating that BCBAs could improve in these areas. But this, I think, is just a small piece of the puzzle where we need to also understand if BCBA's training experiences have been different in their graduate and practicum programs compared to other fields. And so we'll talk about that next study now. All right, LeBlanc et al. In 2020 offered up another study that was results from an online survey. They had 221 behavior analysts weigh in, and 82% of the respondents reported that they either sometimes or often feel unprepared or not trained well to respond to the emotional responses of a family member that they are serving. For example, one respondent reported, I have felt unprepared when interacting with hostile families or families who indicate dissatisfaction with services or who respond in anger. Now, I can vividly remember, I was 24, like a very long time ago. I was 24 years old, and I can vividly remember the first parent who yelled at me, and it was in his home. He had a particular set of skills in mind for his child. He told me he wanted his child to go to the University of Florida. His child was 7 years old, so I had a long way to go to meet that goal. But he was very, very focused on academic skills in those areas. But for me, his child was unable to consistently express his wants and needs. And that situation escalated quickly, and I Has anyone been yelled at by yeah, okay. When you are young and it is your first experience, it is terrifying. And I, for one, absolutely did not know in that moment how to respond. I did not know how to effectively repair the relationship after the fact. And I at least learned kind of trial by fire how to hopefully decrease the likelihood of that happening again in the future. But the unfortunate part is, I now have 16 years, 17 years of experience, and I'm set up for more success to avoid or at least manage when these things happen. But I was never explicitly taught how to manage that, both my own emotions and those of someone else when expectations are different. My experience was all trial by fire, and it sounds like for some of you that was the same. So I think that we can, and we really have to, do better and prepare our future clinicians to not only handle these situations more effectively in the moment, also understand the antecedent strategies that are necessary to hopefully decrease the chances of them happening in the first place. The good thing from the LeBlanc et al. Article is that 91% of respondents felt like skills in this area were extremely important to learn. So for me, that's at least a really good indication that people are self-aware and knowing that it is an area for improvement. Now, again, not only have we had, calls for these areas of deficit to be addressed 25 or more years prior, we have some research in just the last couple of years to indicate for us that it's still a current problem. And that's reported both by clinicians and by the parents that those clinicians serve. Now, while that previous literature demonstrated that training is lacking, it's really important to understand if those interactions are also causing a problem for clinicians. So at this point in time from the literature, we know we haven't been trained on it. We know that those that we're working with say we should do better, but are we actually raising our hands to say, I need help, I'm struggling in this area? We know from the LeBlanc et al. Article that I just spoke about that 94% of behavior analysts find this kind of hilarious, but 94% of behavior analysts say my colleague needs help with these skills. Yeah, it is kind of funny. But the question then remains, are we self-identifying our own lack of skills in these areas? And how are we going to go seek out the necessary training and practice to do better? So as a follow-up to the LeBlanc et al. Study, Dr. Cynthia Anderson and I worked to understand if these challenges exist, are they specific to certain topics and situations, and whether or not those particular situations were addressed in regular graduate and practicum training. In addition to that, we also wanted to know if challenges during parent interaction maintain over time as one gains more experience, or if they are more salient and more significant during a clinician's first 2 years of practice. So a total of 277 surveys were completed, which is the largest pool of data to date in our area. Oh, sorry. What we have here is the first portion of the questions that were asked of participants. So they were asked to rate the perceived level of difficulty across 11 topics, with parents on a 3-point Likert scale, with 1 being, this is a very easy topic for me to bring up and discuss, 2 being, this is a difficult or challenging topic to bring up or discuss, and then 3 being, this is a topic that I actively avoid discussing in any parent meetings. So those topics are along the x-axis, and then the y-axis is the percent of the 277 respondents who rated the topic as easy to discuss. So even though these responses are from behavior analysts, I would imagine for all of you in this room, thinking about having conversations about parent satisfaction with your services, a parent's level of stress, if they cancel with you last minute all the time, their meeting attendance, that some of these may be topics that you could consider, oh, yes, I'm fine to discuss that. For example, like client progress, or I really don't want to bring it up that the parent has canceled the last 3 times in a row. So think about that for yourself in your own practice. But what you can see here from these results is a substantial majority of the respondents responded that discussing a child's progress towards goals, talking about a child's behavior during session, that those were easy topics to bring up and discuss. Roughly half decided to share that talking about caregiver satisfaction with services or a caregiver's level of stress were easy. And then a smaller percentage reported that discussing caregiver adherence to recommendations, talking about caregiver cancellation of services, talking about if you have asked a parent to collect data, discussing that with them, and then discussing barriers to implementation. So if you have asked a parent to do X, Y, and Z at home, and they just aren't doing that for you in line with your agreement, actually discussing that and bringing it up. And so what I think is really important is that the next question becomes, were we taught how to do these things? And the answer for the most part is no. So the next questions that were asked were about whether or not that topic had been addressed and explicitly taught through role play and feedback. So what you see here is the percent of individuals who received what we would call behavioral skills training or a variation of that teach some of these specific skills. Now, I think that it is really important to note that learning how to incorporate caregiver goals into treatment, learning how to compromise, learning how to plan for a difficult conversation, learning how to increase buy-in, were not effectively taught over 94% of these 277 participants. That is just a wild number, and I admittedly am part of that 94%. I did not learn how to do these things in graduate school. So what's really notable about that, though, is the fact that the majority of respondents also indicated actual avoidance behavior when it came to also addressing some of these same things. All right, so this same study then asked if challenges exist, do they persist over time? So the graph depicts the percent of respondents that agreed or strongly agreed with the statement. And we see that building rapport, preparing for difficult conversations, feeling equipped to change caregiver behavior are all reported to be more difficult during a clinician's first 2 years of practice. I assume that that is the same for most of you. Additionally, caregiver interaction was a source of stress for all clinicians to varying degrees, but it did tend to decrease over time, which is good. While that progress is notable as a BCBA gains more experience, I think what is important is for us to think through and understand how can we address this self-reported challenge in these deficits in early career clinicians. And so we know it's not new news that these skills are challenging. And we also know that they are a source of stress. So it's critical for us to consider the ways in which we are going to address these needs and be better equipped to manage these situations, because we know they happen in our very regular and daily practices. So rather than reinvent the proverbial wheel, I guess you would say, in behavior analysis, we have this tendency to shy away from borrowing from other disciplines to our own detriment, absolutely. But instead of reinventing the wheel, there is an already evidence-based existing approach that many of our applied sciences and fellow helping professions are training their clinicians in and practice. So with that said, I am now going to offer an introduction to motivational interviewing. Now, as we dive into motivational interviewing, it's really important for me to preface this with the fact that most other disciplines, if they have been trained in motivational interviewing, it is oftentimes over the course of an entire semester or multiple semesters. So what I'm going to share with you in the next hour is very much just an introduction to the most basic skill set. So what I'm hoping is that it at least gets you excited about it and interested about motivational interviewing and its implications for you and your work. The definition of motivational interviewing is a collaborative and goal-oriented style of communication. Now, if that doesn't resonate with you based on our conversation up until this point, I've certainly missed the mark, but it should be clear why a curriculum and a therapeutic approach that includes both collaboration and a goal-oriented style of communication is exactly what it is that we're needing. Motivational interviewing, or MI for short, otherwise it's a very long name. So I'll refer to it as MI a lot as we continue to go through this presentation, but it is an empirically supported therapeutic approach that has been used to successfully address drug and alcohol abuse, gambling, smoking cessation, weight loss, medication or medical treatment adherence, and professionals across a myriad of disciplines, maybe some of you in this room, but many professionals such as physicians, social workers, mental health counselors, nurses, and even dentists. There are articles about the, yep, like ours. Maybe not you're a dentist. Articles out there where all of those helping professions are being trained and effectively to utilize this approach. There are also several meta-analytic reviews, which include a wide range of clinicians and a wide range of populations that demonstrate that motivational interviewing increases engagement in identifying goals, increases retention in treatment programs, and increases adherence to treatment recommendations. So I hope that that is really kind of bridging the gap to all of the things that we have talked about earlier in this conversation. Okay, so for the behavior analysts in the room, maybe others, you might be wondering, why has this not yet been adopted into the field of behavior analysis, given its clear utility? So it's possible that one reason that motivational interviewing is not yet widely recognized by behavior analysts is that many of the publications on MI have been largely outside of our literature base. And the terms that are utilized to describe the components of motivational interviewing and its theoretical underpinnings generally don't align with the principles of behavior analysts. However, I'm talking to the behavior analysts in the room at this point. We know that just because we are not utilizing the same terminology to describe a phenomenon does not mean that we cannot describe it behavior analytically. We can make that translation, and we should. As radical behaviorists, for those of you in here who are, who know and should be confident in your ability to do that, using your own conceptually sound frameworks and borrowing from other disciplines to meet our own science. And so this particular slide offers up what are traditional motivational interviewing descriptions and then the corresponding behavior analytic description. I wish that I had time to dive into this in a little bit more detail, but I hope that if you have interest in it, you take some time to look up some of these articles, because I know my own field well enough to know that we sometimes are hesitant to borrow from other helping professions. I think this is a really important piece for us to recognize that it is an evidence-based approach, and it is in line with the way that we would describe why an approach could be effective. So let me introduce you now to the 4 core skills of motivational interviewing, and I'm going to walk through some instances in which they might be helpful for you to use in your clinical practice. All right, so these are the 4 core skills of motivational interviewing. They, most of us like a good acronym, regardless of what discipline we're in. So their acronym is OARS, which stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Now, the OARS skills make up this larger skill set that we all would refer to as reflective listening, which is the primary skill set upon which motivational interviewing is built. Now, using these 4 skills allows you to demonstrate interest, demonstrate empathy, demonstrate understanding of each of your parents' unique needs. When a professional demonstrates proficiency in the use of OARS, research has shown us that they are more likely to effectively establish a therapeutic alliance, which then sets the occasion for research for increased collaboration, increased information sharing, and then also ultimately behavior change, which is the goal. Now, in motivational interviewing, we refer to these responses as micro skills. And these micro skills are this fundamental tool that many of us probably already have in our repertoire, but maybe we overlook them or we don't use them as strategically or intentionally as we could. One other problem, and I am like, I'm presenting on this, but I am just the worst at directing conversations. I get like way too far ahead of myself and I'm moving towards the end goal. So these skills have just been a lifesaver for me in terms of my own ability to create therapeutic alliances, build rapport, and just gather pertinent information that I otherwise may have just railroaded the person I'm talking to and not taken the chance to do that. And so the strategic use of these skills, I think, is going to, or at least it has for me, a dramatic effect on what has happened in the course of my relationship. I'm going to review each of them in isolation so that you can see instances in which they might be helpful and why. All right, so O stands for open-ended questions. These are questions that are asked in a way that allows a person to be open and share details. Open-ended questions allow a person to really tell you their story. It is the difference between saying, does your child use the bathroom independently versus what does the toileting process look like for you at home? Those are 2 very different questions. An open-ended question is purposefully designed to encourage this full and meaningful answer. It is obviously the opposite of a closed-ended question, which is designed to encourage a short or just single word answer. We all know that questions are a huge part of our information gathering process with any stakeholder that we're working with. And whether it's a parent or someone you're collaborating with, being really thoughtful about what you're asking and when you're asking it is important. So here are a few examples of how you might want to start your open-ended questions. It is possible that in your regular work, you are often asking closed-ended questions unintentionally, or at least I certainly was. So you might be asking questions like, have you had a good week? Or is the behavior intervention plan working? Or have you seen progress? Even, is there anything else I can do for you today? So all of those questions are going to give you some information, but they're also going to give you answers like good, fine, yes, no. And so while that tells you something, there are alternative questions that can open up the door for more. So as an example, have you had a good week? Could be modified to, can you tell me about the highs and lows of your week? Is the behavior intervention plan working so far? could be changed to what parts of the behavior intervention plan are most challenging for you and why? And is there anything else that I can do to help you with? Could be changed to in what ways can I support you? Cool, tell me. Oh, okay. All right. So write that down. I see you shaking your head over there too. Did you think about that? That- That's amazing. I see, I love that feedback. And that is why I was very excited to talk to people outside my own field. So can you is a trick question that could lead to just a single word answer. Yeah, I love it. It does. It sounds like it would be directive, but it's still opening up the door for them. That's amazing. Yes. Oh, you're just stretching. Stretch away. Thank you for that. I love that. Yeah, please. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and when you're right, because when you are meeting with a parent and you have asked them probably 30 questions at this point, and you are maybe the fifth person that they have talked to about their child, it can be overwhelming. And so simplifying it for them. Oh, yes, I will repeat it. So there were a couple comments about on this particular slide, which I think you guys can see at home now because I backed up. But the MI communication question, what does the toileting process look like for you at home, may even be too complicated and too long. So simplifying that into what does toileting look like would be potentially useful for a parent who may feel overwhelmed or overburdened by explaining all the things that are going on with their child. Okay. All right. So the next letter in ORS is A, which stands for affirmations. The goal here is to find strengths and shape those into more consistent and generalized behavior, meaning we want to find things that our parents are already able to do, provide reinforcement or what we hope is reinforcement in this form of verbal affirmations. And an affirmation identifies something positive about someone, particularly a parent, and acknowledges it. Again, here we have a commonly used communication and an example of motivational interviewing communication. So consider, which of these are what you might be more likely to utilize in conversation and some of the differences between them. What you also might notice is that the MI communication might feel like it's slowing you down. I mentioned before that I just like to, time is precious and you get excited and you just want to like get to that end goal. I can help you. This is how we're going to do it. And so it might feel like it's slowing you down in the conversation, but ultimately you are building a long-term relationship with this family. And instead of, I always have to remember this for myself, instead of jumping into the next question or next solution that I might offer, simply reflecting, which we'll talk about in a minute, or offering an affirmation is a great place to start. Now, one thing that I know we all know, but sometimes we forget, is that our parents are under a tremendous amount of stress. Um, they just reaching out for help can sometimes be overwhelming and exhausting for them and challenging. So if you can't think of anything else to affirm, maybe it's been a challenging working relationship. If you can't think of anything else utilize as an affirmation, just thank them for making the time with you. Thank them for meeting and reminding them that you know that they are busy and you just appreciate their efforts to meet with you. So it is our role as clinicians to increase the behaviors that are going to be consistent with success. So even in instances where a parent has tried, so maybe they've made attempts to collect data, but not quite to the degree that you were hoping that they would, the effort was there. And it's a good approximation to be able to thank them for and shape over time. And so affirmations let you start that shaping process. They also can be used to reframe a negative. So, for example, you might say, I can see that you are really frustrated with how things are going, but I admire you for still showing up to these meetings. It definitely shows how much you care. Another example, maybe a parent says to you during a meeting, I have spent so much time trying to do what you asked me to do, and I've reread the behavior plan 10 times, and it is still not working. You could respond with an affirmation before jumping into, well, did you do this or did you not do this? Just saying, wow, it sounds like you are really dedicated to doing your best. And I see that this is important to you. I also see that you are trying to your daughter. So starting there can really bring down the charge of the room. So this type of communication, of course, can go a long way for fostering a strong rapport, especially one that's at the beginning stages, but it can also be utilized to repair one that has been damaged. The reflections are the third of the micro skills and are the R in ORs. So reflections are a way of mirroring back what a parent has said to you. The ultimate goal here of reflections is to gain an understanding of their ideas, but more importantly, to check for your own understanding how accurately you've been listening. For many parents, you might be one of the only adults that they speak to in the course of a week. They are at home, potentially with their children, and they come in to talk with you, and they may be unloading quite a bit of information and challenge that they've been experiencing. I am sure that we can all think of a time where we experienced a meeting with a parent where they have shared massive amounts of information with us. And it's hard at that point to kind of sift through where even to start. Now, it can be difficult for us to make sure that we have captured a parent's concerns and that we are able to get focused on what's going to be most important for them. The rephrasing or the reflection to a parent is this opportunity to serve as a prompt for them to know whether or not what they are sharing is clear. So you may reflect something back to them and they say, wait, that's not what I meant. Or no, that's actually not my main priority. So it is that opportunity. And what you see here with the common communication may be to state that the way that they're feeling is normal or that's typical for a child that you serve. And that in some instances can be helpful, but it might be even more beneficial to simply reflect back to the parent what it is that they said and be certain that you have heard what their individual needs might. Now, there's a few different ways that you can reflect. The first and the easiest is a repetition, which is simply repeating back using the same words very simply what someone has said. So this could be as simple as saying, I hear you telling me you're stressed. There's also a simple reflection, which is slightly more advanced than a repetition. And the main difference is that you're not then just exactly repeating back what the parent is saying, but you are saying really close to the initial context. And so you might say, it sounds like all of the stressors in your life are a lot for you to manage right now. And then finally, the most complex is referred to as a complex reflection and goes well beyond what a parent has shared with you. You are gathering quite a bit of information. You are inferring some greater meaning from that. And you also might make a statement about an emotion that the parent might be feeling. You got to be careful with that piece of it. You might say, what I'm hearing from you is that you are overwhelmed and you have a lot on your plate right now. Your stress level is high and it's impacting your ability to manage everything. You can see why that one would be considered quite a bit more complex. Now, a piece of advice, which I also remember myself, is that when I'm feeling this need to immediately jump to a fixed solution suggestion, taking a moment to reflect back, or like I mentioned with affirmations, is just a way to ensure that a parent is feeling heard and very much a part. Now, the last micro skill in OARS is S, which is for summaries, and it is one of the most important. So summaries can be used to help a parent organize their information, their experience, and it helps you to focus on upcoming goals and the next steps that you're wanting to implement. So meetings can be always full of a lot of information. And sometimes it's just necessary to help a parent transition or wrap up a conversation. So these summaries, they collect all the information that the parent's going to give you, and they offer this opportunity to then link those to next steps. So what you see here in the common versus motivational interviewing communication examples is this clear difference between being directive and being collaborative. And so in common communication, we may be working quickly to offer a solution, talk about next steps, saying, I will write a behavior plan and we will review it next week. And your intention may be great, right? You have a solution, you're offering it to them. But with the MI communication, it is this chance to recap what was shared, affirm that you listened really well to them, and also asking for permission before you're moving forward. I assumed this at the beginning, so many of you maybe as well, but summaries are not only to be used at the end of a conversation. Summaries can be used to transition between topics. And so in this example, you say, I hear that this has been a challenging time for family. You've been working hard to get insurance coverage and move through the intake process. I think it'd be good for us to talk more about your daughter's communication skills, because I know it's important to you. Are you ready to move to that topic? You're asking, you've recapped, you're asking for permission to forward. All right, so, for it should be clear that these are really critical skills that would be useful across the board, regardless of the discipline that you're in. And you might be saying like, well, this all sounds really well and good, but the people I work with, we don't have a full semester or supervised experience that we can go through again to learn these skills. And so I wanted through a research study to indicate the at which we might be able to teach some of these skills both virtually and in a brief format. We were able to do that. So I'm going to walk you through that study now. And then we're going to end by going through an additional MI tool that might be useful in your practice. I talked at the beginning, and I'll say this, while this is specific to BCBAs, the way we taught and the outcomes, I don't think are. So, but I did share with you that my particular research interests were related to how do we prepare BCBAs who otherwise aren't being trained in these skills for their work. So how do we prepare them for creating and maintaining these meaningful relationships with the parents that they're serving and with the other professionals that they're collaborating with? So This study for me is just the first step in understanding how we can teach motivational interviewing more easily, especially to people. It seemed like less than half of you all have experience training in motivational interviewing. So how do we teach that to people after you're already into the workforce and you're done with your, kind of graduate training portion of your career? The foundational skills that are required to successfully implement MI, of course, overlap with a lot of the skills that were suggested for improvement in some of those studies that I went over earlier. So this particular study addressed the effectiveness of a brief, virtually delivered training to enhance the communication skills of behavior analysts who were working specifically with parents of children with autism. Now, the primary purpose of this investigation was to explore the effectiveness of teaching MI skills on BCBA behavior. And the secondary purpose was to evaluate the acceptability and the feasibility and the usefulness of motivational interviewing in their regular practice. I'll tell you more about that. So BMI here, if you're wondering, that stands for brief motivational interviewing. I did not make that up. It was already in the literature, and it is a term that is used to describe a training that is brief in nature. So typically 2 or 3 hours or less. So listed here on this particular slide are the primary and secondary research questions that were addressed with the study. So I'm going to move through the methods and the results section for each of these research questions. All right, so the participants were recruited from organizations with the stated purpose of providing ABA services, either home or clinic-based. We recruited from January to March in 2022, so pretty recently. And those behavior analysts were located in North Carolina, Virginia, Massachusetts, Texas, Illinois, Colorado, California, Hawaii. But I'm sure you guys may or may not know this. In behavior analysis, we typically do like small n single subject design. So doing a study that was a group design, different, right? For at least for our literature base. But the reason that we selected to do it this way was because we wanted a large enough pool of participants to really understand, especially from the social validity standpoint, are BCBAs going to be interested in learning this skill? Is there going to be a change in their behavior over time? And so we wanted to have a larger number of participants. And so to get to that and to meet our power analysis, we did distribute through 2 additional listservs. One was through a university program, and the other was through people who had traveled with Global Autism Project and were BCBAs. So after completion of consent, demographics, and a parent-child interaction questionnaire, participants were randomly assigned to pairs such that each dyad was then assigned into treatment or into control by a colleague who was independent of the study. Now, again, BMI stands for Brief Motivational Interviewing, and this particular training consisted of a 60-minute didactic training, and it went through those 4 OR skills that we just talked about. It went through examples and non-examples, and it also had active responding embedded throughout so that we could check for understanding as time went on. So all of the training occurred virtually. It was asynchronous. And so it could be completed at a time and choosing of the. All right, so the primary research question looked at the effects of training on clinician behavior, specifically the micro skills or the 3 micro skills that make up the acronym FORS. To measure how BCBAs might respond to parents presenting to them with various concerns or dilemmas, the Helpful Response Questionnaire, HRQ, was utilized. Now, the HRQ was developed by one of the founders of MI. It did not make it up. I wish I had. But it has been utilized in a number of studies. It has some really wonderful validity. And so What it does suggest, though, is that you can adapt it to different populations in different fields. And therefore, it was adapted for individuals who were interacting with parents of children with autism. And they were common situations. So we actually had parents of children read these scenarios and give us feedback on how likely they would have been to say that, or someone they know to have said or experienced it. One of the examples included in the HRQ was, and I'm going to read it, a 25-year-old woman says to you, my child was just diagnosed with autism. They're only 2 years old. I feel devastated and I don't know what to do. Will my child ever go to college? Will they get married? How will I know if they're happy? These are the questions that keep at night. Now, as a licensed psychologist as well, I have done autism diagnosing. I have heard this statement in my history. And so this was one. The first two slides that I offered you all were also a part of the HRQ. And so it presents 6 hypothetical statements and then asks you to respond and imagine that you were in that situation and write down what you might say in response to each parent statement. And so responses, and I did not make up this scoring, it is part of the literature, but they are scored 1 to 5 for the presence of MI consistent behavior. They are scored lower if there are MI inconsistent behavior, such as directing or disagreeing with statement. Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go through each research question, then the measure for that question, followed by the results for ease of understanding. So the initial primary research question was, what are the effects of BMI on clinician behavior? Now, the results for behavior change are in terms of the total HRQ score, which is what you see here, and then also in terms of the number of open-ended questions, the number of affirmations, and the number of reflections that were used in the responses to those scenarios. So here are the total HRQ scores pre to post tests, and what you see in the light blue, that represents the control scores, and then the dark blue represents the treatment group scores. And the error bars are present to indicate variability in the data. But what you notice is similar pre-test scores across control and treatment groups, no significant change from pre-test to post-test for the control group, and then a pretty significant improvement for the treatment group following training. Now, these are responses that included open-ended questions. So the number of open-ended questions someone wrote, and this also demonstrated a statistically significant difference when comparing control and treatment group at post-test, as well as comparing treatment group from pre to post. Similarly, here were the number of affirmations. Affirmations are my favorite. They were clearly the favorite for the participants as well. I don't know why, but sometimes it's just nice to tell people really nice about them. So it feels good all around. But the number of affirmations used in the HR responses had a p-value of less than 0.001 for control group versus treatment at post-test, and then also for treatment from pre-post. And then finally, these are total reflections, and this did include both simple and complex reflections. And you see here an equally noticeable change in score over time. And so the second primary research question was answered using a researcher developed tool which measured MI knowledge. And so the difference here is that I'll tell you about the measure first. So the measure consisted of 20 items, and the majority of those were hypothetical statements that a parent said, but then also included what you as a clinician would say in response. And the participant's job was to look at that response and indicate what motivational interviewing skills were being used in that response. So the HRQ was being used to actually see a demonstration in motivational interviewing. This particular measure was to better understand their knowledge or their understanding of the MI skills that they were reading about. So here are two examples from the MI knowledge measure. Participants were asked to read each one and then identify the skills that were present in the response. You can see in the first scenario that the response is an example of an open-ended question. And then in the second scenario, there's actually two micro skills that are present. And so the participant would actually need to have identified both an affirmation and a reflection being present. So the scoring on this MI knowledge measure was in terms of the number of errors that were made. And so in the second scenario, if that participant had indicated that an affirmation was present, but not a reflection, that would have been counted as one error. So this graph depicts the change from pre to post on the number of errors that were made. You can see here similarities at pre-test, and then a reduction in errors at post-test. Notably, this is a statistically significant decrease in the number of errors, but you're probably wondering, why are there so many errors? There were several hundred errors that could have been made across the measure. So that it's actually a pretty low number, but I understand that it looks high if you didn't have that context. Now, we know that at least for BCBAs, their behavior and their knowledge changed after the 1 hour virtual training, which is fantastic, right? That's really good sign. But it might not really be that meaningful if BCBAs aren't interested in learning more about motivational interviewing, or if they're not interested in using motivational interviewing in practice. And so knowing that MI is this borrowed skill set that may or may not be viewed favorably by behavior analysts, we wanted to answer a secondary research question that was related to the social validity and understanding to what degree BCBAs find motivational interviewing to be feasible, to be acceptable, and to be useful to their practice. So this particular measure consisted of 21 items. The first 20 were a 5-point Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And then there was an open-ended question at the end where participants were asked why or why not they would integrate motivational interviewing into their regular practice. Right, so the first several questions were related to participants' perceptions of the training and its impact on their skills. So the dark blue bar represents strongly agree, and the light blue bar represents agree. And so what you see here in the pie chart is 100% of participants agreed or strongly agreed that the training improved their ability to communicate with parents, improved their ability to actively listen, and then also improved their MI knowledge. With over 50% in one case with MI knowledge improving, 96% strongly agreed with that. Additionally, some questions were asked specific to the perceptions about motivational interviewing, how MI might impact their practice. And so again, what you see here is 100% of participants agreed or strongly agreed that the training was applicable to their ongoing interactions, agreed or strongly agreed that it would help them to manage difficult conversations, was seen as evidence-based approach to treatment, and was reported to be useful. And so then in this final slide depicting the social validity results, you see up here and to the left that 96% agreed or strongly agreed that they would like to learn more. One person neither agreed nor disagreed, they just weren't sure. But 100% of participants then agreed or strongly agreed that MI should be taught to students, that they would recommend the training to other clinicians, and that they thought it was an important skill to develop. All right, so quickly, I just want to run through some of these comments that participants made. And so the numerical data on the previous slides is pretty clear in terms of the acceptability and usefulness of this training and of this approach. But these particular comments, I think, solidify that quantitative data in qualitative form. So someone said, I think MI is fantastic and should be used by all BCBAs. MI gave me new tools to pair, relate, and connect with parents during happy and challenging times. And MI allows a caregiver to feel heard and bridges the gap. The idea of a robotic BCBA driven by data only and brings in passion and be awesome. All right, so while the study provides, I think, a lot of promise to address some of those gaps in skills, there's of course some more questions to be answered, and maybe there's people in this room who are excited about research and may want to answer some of them, which would be amazing. So given that this training was really brief in nature, future studies can explore the impact of longer trainings, for example, doing a 3-hour workshop with breakouts and opportunities for role playing. I'm doing that in December. I can't wait. The helpful response questionnaire, the HRQ, was also the only measure of MI skills, which was, of course, based on hypothetical scenarios and responses to those. And so observing the use of MI skills with real parents, of course, is going to be the best indicator of improvement, long-term behavior change. More notably, I think, is we need to explore the impact of using MI on a parent's perception of their relationship with their clinician. So what components of MI are most impactful to that parent-clinician relationship? Does the use of MI increase adherence to treatment? And some of these questions have been answered in the literature, but with other populations. So it's important for us to look at it in terms of parents of children with autism as well. And then finally, this is what I'm currently super excited and nerding out about. Love the HRQ. There's opportunities to integrate it into academia where you are training students to practice. So watching students progress in their skills from the start to the end of the semester. We're also integrating it through our interviewing process with BCBAs to understand upfront what their skill set is in the area of building those therapeutic alliances in practice compassionate care. Okay, we have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to move ahead just a bit. Some of this is recap, so I can skip over it. These are 2 quick articles that are good introductions to therapeutic relationships and alliances. This first one also provides a brief introduction to motivational interviewing, and some of the evidence-based literature is reviewed. And then this is the second article. It just came out last month. It is a primer for motivational interviewing. It is an opportunity to have a little bit more of an in-depth explanation of those core MI skills, the times that it might be useful to use those skills, and the mechanisms that make MI effective. So we've spent a lot of time talking about therapeutic relationships and some of those core micro skills. Additionally, those conversations that we have had so far are really related to parent interactions. But we all know that there's a lot of collaboration that happens, and making certain that whatever goals you're selecting are in line with what is wanting to do, is in line with their own goals for the child, and also our goals and our treatment plans that can and will be implemented. I think that's key. You can agree on something. Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for your presentation. I think it's really interesting. So my name is Dr. Binta Green, and I am a professor of social work, and I teach my students MI a lot in social work. And so I'm just thinking about it, and probably from my perspective, in that oftentimes when I'm training and teaching students about MI, it's from the position of where your client is in terms of changing said behavior that they're wanting to change. And as a mom of a child who has autism, I kind of went through all of that, like, why my kid, all of that, right? Before my clinical mind kicked in, like, gotta get them services. It's not about you. But but I'm just thinking about, and he has a ABA, he has a tech, um, and I'm thinking about using MI with them, and as me as mom, I'm just wondering, when we're looking at this, we're looking at the family system as the client, right? Because we can't work with the child without including the parent. And so for me, in thinking about how an ABA collaborates with the parents or caregivers using MI, I'm just wondering, would this mostly be for parents who are resistant to their child having autism or needing services? Because I think that if I'm looking at, because motivational interviewing is about changing behavior, right? And so I guess for me, it's like what behavior of the parents or what behaviors of the parents, and thinking about the stages of change that we're working with them through.
Yeah.
What behaviors of the parents are we trying to change by using MI? Um, and so I guess for me, that's kind of would this be more appropriate in terms of working with maybe older children? Or if we're working with MI with parents, are we working with them if they're resistant to kind of get them there? So I think for me, that's where, if you don't mind, kind of maybe connecting it a little bit more, because my perception of MI is, you know, pre-contemplation, contemplation, whatnot. And then I'm thinking of a parent who is a little shocked, a little resistant about my child needing services, or as you said, with the parent who, wanted their child to go to Florida.
Yeah.
Like, you need to do this in order to get him to Florida, right?
Yes.
So if you don't mind maybe making that connection a little bit more for me, who is a non-ABA person, but utilizes ABA services in my own personal life, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. If I could have planted you in the audience, which I didn't, but that was a perfect, I'm going to skip ahead for a couple slides just for the sake of time. Two things. One, you are completely right that, gosh, probably like 10 things. Yes, you can use it with parents who are both ready to go, right? And really excited about things. And the tool that I'm gonna walk through, I think, is perfect for anyone, regardless of kind of where they're at. Parents who are in a more challenging place need some time to get there, and you're kind of working them towards that place. That, in my professional opinion, is gonna take a more seasoned clinician who is much more it's just more highly trained in motivational interviewing. So there's not some of these like quick tools that they can implement. That's going to take a lot of time and build to get there. But to answer your question, I think that the tool that we'll talk about right now will help a little bit with the concern you brought up with how do you know what parent behavior we're going to change? How do you know if they're ready to even and get there? So let me walk through that, but I want to circle back to whether or not you feel like that question was fully answered. If it wasn't, we can talk about it more. For you and I can hang out later. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so let me just take the moment to kind of center myself for where we want to go from here. I think to use the last 10 minutes. What I want for you to do is just consider for a second how difficult it is for you to change your own behavior. It certainly is for me. Did anyone meet their New Year's resolution? Okay, literally, for those of you at home, literally no one raised their hand. I don't even know what mine was. It was August. I don't even remember what it is. Yeah, most of you don't remember. So knowing that it isn't easy to quit smoking, it's not easy to eat healthy, it's not easy to put down our phone and pick up a book, knowing that all of those things are the case is useful for us to consider when we are asking parents and or teachers to change their own behavior. And so because of that, we need a tool, and motivational interviewing has one, to help us approach some of these challenges where we are indicating, or at least trying to identify, what is the behavior that a family wants to change, either for themselves or for their child, and how willing are they to move towards it. Like I said, I feel like I planted you. It's great. So there is a tool in motivational interviewing that allows us to do better towards identifying not only the goal, but the level of commitment towards that goal. And so you're assessing their readiness. Remembering, like I said, how hard it is to change our own behavior is important. But this tool is going to give us an opportunity to respond in some ways that are really compassionate. And that tool is called the readiness ruler. I'm gonna role play with myself. So bear with me. So if someone were to ask me and say, Callie, what is a goal that you have for yourself? I might say, I have a goal to walk 10,000 steps a day. And they might say to me, wow, that's a really impressive goal. Why is that important? And I might answer for them that I want to stay healthy. I want to be active. It's good for me to clear my mind after work. And then the final question that they might ask me is, well, how have you been doing towards reaching that goal? And in that case, I might say to them, well, some days are good and some days are bad. Some days I just want to watch Netflix after work and not go out in the North Carolina heat I apparently brought with me to Pennsylvania, or I'm traveling and it's just too much. But regardless of being extra busy at times, I know that it's the right thing for me to do. I know that it is best for my mental health. So through the course of that conversation, the person talking to me has had the opportunity to understand what my goal is, what my motivation and reinforcers are around meeting that goal, and what are the potential barriers that might be in place. And in motivational interviewing, what we refer to that as is change talk and sustain talk. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means. So change talk enables us to record, it enables us to measure, shape, reinforce verbal stimuli that lead to readiness, that lead towards behavior change. Now, these are statements that are going to drive motivation to change behavior, get to a needed outcome. Sustain talk, on the other hand, does still allow us to record, measure, shape, but it's shaping behavior that aligns with those barriers to reach those outcomes. So if we use the example that I provided in my own life regarding, the reasons I want to walk more, I identified that it is healthier for me. It helps my mental health. We also, and so we would know that is my change talk. I also identified that I like Netflix and sometimes I just want to sit on the couch. And that is my sustain talk. So we hear these types of statements with clients and with stakeholders and with families. If we don't hear them, we should be then asking questions that are evoking some of those responses so we can gather more information. So what you see here are examples of common statements that you might hear from teachers, parents. For example, a parent might say to you, they are tired of doing everything for their child. They want them to be more independent. And then a sentence later, they might say, it's just easier for me to put their shoes on for them. I avoid a fight less. But what that parent has told you is both their change talk and their sustain talk. So again, what I just framed for you is the rationale and kind of the basis for it. And now I'll walk through quickly what the readiness ruler is within motivational interviewing. So just if you don't mind, think for a minute about a behavior for yourself that you want to change. All right, so now that you have that in your mind, hopefully, if I were to ask you, rate on a scale of 1 to 10, how willing you are to change that behavior. So think about that. Okay. Now that you have that number in your head, why didn't you pick a higher number? Why didn't you pick a lower number? The reasons for not selecting higher, the reasons for not selecting lower are leading you to identifying your own sustained talk and your own change. So I want to quickly walk us through a conversation that you might have with a parent. So a parent tells you that they want to work on toilet training for their child. In this instance, you might say, it sounds like toilet training is really important to you. On a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to work on this tomorrow? Let's say the parent says to you, an 8. In that case, I might ask them, why didn't you say a 9? And they may say to me, well, it's important to me, but toilet training has never worked in the past. It's exhausting. It takes a lot of energy. There's accidents. My child gets upset. All of those reasons are why they would not have rated it higher and are part of their sustained. Now, if you ask them, okay, thank you for sharing all of that with me. Why didn't you rate it lower? And they might tell you, I want him to be more independent. It's important to me for him to be autonomous of his self-care, for his safety. Pull-ups are really expensive, so it would be nice if I no longer had to purchase those. So all of that information is giving you both your potential punishers and your potential reinforcers to utilize effectively in a compassionate and empathic conversation with that parent. Now, the readiness ruler is a very simple tool. It's one that is effective in information gathering, and you should be able to start using it in your conversations. And to circle back to your question, I want to leave everyone with something that you can kind of immediately go into practice and use to at least gain some more information, set the occasion for sharing with families in a more compassionate and collaborative setting. And so I hope from that standpoint that that's done that. With what you shared in your question, I think for families who are exceptionally resistant, and there's much more that you have to unpack with them, build rapport, really understand what's important to them. That's going to take quite a bit more time and needs to be done by someone who has a pretty substantial level of training in this particular area if you're going to effectively use motivational interviewing. But I'd love to talk more afterwards if you want to. Okay, just to finish us up here, we have integrated motivational interviewing for our clinicians at Mosaic. It's part of our student program. It's part of our onboarding for new clinicians. Happy to talk to any of you about how we've done that. But feel free to email me. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. And I appreciate you guys spending the afternoon with me.